Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of new viewers to the channel on this particular video, so just to go over some basics, my name is Sky and I was a Dodge service technician for 11 years, so I've worked on these HEMI engines very consistently throughout the years. Now, we are talking in this video about the infamous HEMI tick. How can we prevent it? First thing I want to do here is I want to go over some misinformation that's out there, and then I want to go ahead and add in some new information. Now, there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to be talking about in this video, so if you're only interested in the end result, I'm going to include the chapters here down below so you can skip forward to the parts that are pertinent to you. All right, let's get into the video. So what we're talking about in this video is clearly the HEMI tick. Now, I feel like I have to explain that a little bit. What exactly are we talking about when we're talking about the HEMI tick? I mean, the HEMIs, unfortunately, they make a lot of different ticking noises. That's just something that they do. Their injector tick is extremely loud. A lot of them will break the exhaust bolts to make a tick on cold startup. But what we're talking about in this video specifically is we are talking about a hot tick. One, when the engine is at operating temperature, at idle, you can hear a little tick, 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 or a ting, ting, ting noises. I kind of think it sounds more like. Now, let's also talk about which vehicles that specifically affects. Now, if you've seen my channel before and you've seen some of my older HEMI videos, you will know that primarily the issue arises only on 2009 and later HEMI engines. The earlier ones aren't really affected by this issue. They have their own issues, but they're not affected specifically by the HEMI tick. Now, what is this ticking noise? What is happening inside the engine? Well, at this point, the needle bearings and the roller part of the lifters has failed and is allowing the end of the roller lifter to jiggle up and down a little bit, and so it's slapping the cam lobe face, and that is the ticking noise that you're hearing, is that tapping noise of that lifter against the cam lobe. Now, the cam lobe itself starts to be eaten away, and eventually that leads into a misfire because the cam is no longer able to open the valve properly, and it leads to an engine misfire. A lot of people think that every single HEMI engine will eventually have this problem, and that is not true at all. In fact, there are a great many HEMI engines that I've worked on that have over 200,000 miles on them that have never had this issue. So first off, I want to address some of the misinformation that's out there. Now, there's a very, very popular video out there of a gentleman who believes that the issues stem from the fact that Chrysler raised the camshaft into the block and that therefore it's too far away from the crankshaft and doesn't receive that splash lubrication, and he thinks that's why this is happening. Now, this video has gained a lot of traction, but it overlooks a couple of things. One is that the engines are not built like they were in the 60s. They don't rely on the exact same technology as they used to. They don't rely on that splash lubrication. The other thing is that it overlooks the fact that this engine has been out for near 20 years now. If there had been that serious of a design flaw in it, it would have shown its head long before this. Now, if you do your research, you'll realize that this issue with the cam and lobe issue did not rear its head until 2009 and on. So what happened then with the 2003 to 2008 models? Why are they not subject to this? That's something I'm going to talk about. I'll tell you right now that the block is identical essentially between all of the Gen 3 HEMI models. Now, the only thing that they changed was in 2009, they added variable cam timing, and that necessitated a small change to the block to add a larger camshaft journal at the front, so this new style camshaft should fit in there. The lifter oiling and the way in which they receive their oiling, the orientation of the lifters, the position itself of the camshaft, nothing changed from the moment it was introduced in 2003. So why does this problem not affect the 2003 to 2008 models? Well, it's my contention that in 2009, when they added that variable cam timing and changed the camshaft, something was wrong with the camshaft hardening on the lobes themselves, and that hardening is failing prematurely, and that is what leading to the roller lifter failure, and that's what leading to the HEMI tick issue all along. So I have HEMI engines prior to 2009 with 200+ miles on them. I removed the lifters. Perfect. No issues whatsoever at all. So that tells you right there that it is not an oiling issue to these lifters. Now, a lot of people think that when they updated the lifters, now Chrysler themselves, they did update the lifters in 2016. They changed the style a little bit. I'll go ahead and throw a picture up here of the old style versus the new style. A lot of people say, well, that fixed the problem, therefore, absolutely, it was the lifters that were the issue. Well, I will refute that by saying that it did not actually fix the issue. I've worked on many 2016, 2017, and 2018 models that I did end up having to do cam and lifter on. So I really don't think that the lifters were the issue. I believe that it is the cam lobe hardening issue, that the hardening is failing, which then eats at the cam or at the lifter roller itself, and that's what beats up the lifters and eventually leads to lifter failure. So it's a chicken or the egg scenario about which happened which the first, but that is my belief about what is happening. So with that being the case, if it is in fact a camshaft hardening issue that's causing the problems all along, what can we do to keep that from happening to your engine? Now, I just said that on those pre-2009 models that there is nothing wrong with the oiling system for the lifters, but there is no denying that in my experience, vehicles with high idle times like fleet vehicles or police vehicles, especially ones that just sit there and idle for hours and hours, there is no question that these are the ones that are affected most severely by this issue. Almost every police vehicle is going to have this issue if it has a HEMI engine because they just sit there and idle forever. Now that leads us to say, well, what is causing that? Well, if you're idling for extended periods of time, what is your oil pressure? Your oil pressure is the lowest it's going to be while the engine is running. So it's experiencing sustained lower end oil pressures, and that seems to be leading to this cam lobe failure. Now at this point, I'm sure you're thinking, Scott, you just said that it wasn't a lubrication issue because on those 03 to 08 models, they never had any problems with their lifter oiling. So why are you now saying there's an oiling issue? Well, what I'm saying is on those 03 to 08 models, it was clear that the oil PSI requirements of that engine were just fine. It was not an issue and there was enough oil there. However, on these 2009 and later ones with this camshaft hardening issue on these cam lobes, it appears as though the idle PSI is not quite enough to keep this issue from happening. So the solution then, and a way to prevent this from happening, is to add oil PSI at idle. How do we do that? Now, to clear up another misconception, many people think that if you just get rid of this MDS system that it solves this problem. That is not true as well. On my recent vehicle I had a 2010 Dodge Challenger, had 126,000 miles on it. It was a manual transmission vehicle, which means it does not come with an MDS system. However, there was a cam lobe hardening failing on one of the lobes, and one of the roller lifters was about to fail on that vehicle. Now, it wasn't actually noticeable just yet. I was actually just changing the camshaft to a performance one anyway, but during that process, I found that it was about to fail. What this tells me is that that oiling PSI is just low enough at idle that it affects all of the vehicles across the board. Now, if you've watched some of my other earlier videos, I'll go ahead and link to one right here, but I show you exactly how the oiling system works on HEMI engine and where it sends that oil. Now, on these HEMI engines, the lifter boards themselves are fed oil directly from an oil gallery. They do not rely on this splash lubrication from the crankshaft and that's all the oil that they get. That's not how it works. They're getting oiling from actually two different locations. One, from the oil coming down the push rod tube into the back of the lifter, it then drains around the lifter itself. That's one way. But there are specific oil galleries that are drilled into the block that go directly to the lifter boards that can be pressurized through the MDS system. Now, I do not believe that when the MDS system is not activated that there's no oil going through there. I still believe that they allow a certain amount of oil to go through there, just not pressurized oil. So the question then becomes at this point, if our oil pressure at idle is not quite enough, what do we need to do to ramp that pressure up? Now, I have heard of a lot of different fleet companies. They will try to write a custom tune that makes the vehicles idle a couple hundred RPM higher than they normally would to help alleviate this issue. Now, I think that can potentially help, but I do think there's a better solution. Let's talk about your engine oil pump for a minute. Now, your oil pump is what's called a fixed displacement pump. That means for every single revolution that it makes, it's going to give you an exact amount of oil. That number will not change. You can't make more each time around. It's not variable, it's fixed. So you can only get that exact amount of oil. The only way to make more oil is to spin it faster and generate more RPM. So I've done this really basic graph here. You have engine oil pressure on the left-hand side, and on the bottom you have engine RPM. So you see, as you ramp up the RPM, you will generate more pressure. Now, these pumps are all the same in that if you keep generating more and more and more RPM, they're gonna keep generating more pressure, but at a certain point, we don't want that. We want it to level off. They accomplish that through the use of a relief valve. There's a little spring inside of there that at a certain PSI, it opens up, drains off that excess oil. So at that point, you just maintain a flat line. So as you see here, generally on your HEMI engine oil pump, you're gonna get around 25 to 30 PSI idle when it's hot. Now when you rev it up, it's going to go up to 65 PSI and then start bleeding off from there. So you see it come up, then it levels off and holds. Now, our problem is not up here, right? We've talked about that. Our problem is the lubrication at idle speeds alone. So we don't really care about what's happening up here. This has always been enough oil. Now, if you look at the aftermarket oil pumps that are available pretty much wherever you look for them, they're gonna say that they're a high pressure oil pump. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, it does not change anything about its characteristics below here. All they are doing is they're installing a different spring so that it regulates at a different PSI. And what that means is that basically it goes up another 10 PSI before it levels off. That's the only change that's happening here with those high pressure oil pumps. What does that do for us? It does nothing. We don't care about this. This was already working fine anyway. What can we do to be different? Well, we need a high volume oil pump. That is the key. Having more volume at a lower RPM changes your pressure. It makes it to a higher PSI. So if we're looking for a high volume oil pump, it would look something like this. Now it would still level off at the same 65 PSI of a factory pump, but we would have more PSI at a lower RPM. So if you were to compare idle speed RPM, say you're idling at 750 RPM, well, on your stock pump, you'd be here. But on the high volume pump, you'd be here. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for that extra PSI at idle. And I think that's a much more effective solution than just changing the tune for your stock pump to idle a couple hundred RPM higher, which is kind of annoying anyway, to be perfectly honest. I like vehicles that idle nice and low. I think you do too. So a high volume pump seems to be the solution. Now, when looking around through the aftermarket, not a lot of high volume pumps out there. In fact, I wasn't able to find any. I'm not saying there's not any because I think somebody will correct me on that. I'm sure there's one out there, but I haven't found it yet. However, what I did find was that the Hellcat oil pump that's used in the 6.2 liters has a higher volume. The rotors are slightly thicker than they are for both the 5.7 and the 6.4 liter engines. So again, it has to be Hellcat specific, seems to be a higher volume. Now it will bolt up to your engine. I'm not precisely sure about the pickup tube because I have not had one in my hands just yet to verify that, but I believe it will still bolt up just the same as your factory pump does. So to me, if you're looking at an issue with the HEMI TICK where replacing the camshaft and lifters, if you were to take that to a shop, generally you're looking at between $3,500 and $4,500 to accomplish that. If you can install a Hellcat oil pump for a couple $100 plus labor, that seems to me to be a pretty good solution to save this thing. So that is just my opinion, but based on my experience, that's what I've seen, that a high volume oil pump could actually prevent this issue from happening at all. All right, you guys, I want to say thank you so much for watching this whole thing. I know that was a lot of information. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more about this sort of thing, and we'll see you next time on Reignited.